And welcome everyone to today's webinar, When Data Doesn't Matter, a Realistic Application of Analytics. My name is Ed Rakowski. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of The Synergist, a magazine of the American Industrial Hygiene Association. I'd like to thank all listeners for attending today's event, and especially SiteHawk for sponsoring this webinar. Our presenter today is David Williams, who has over 20 years experience in product marketing, digital strategy, and program development at SiteHawk. David's rich experience includes working on projects for clients such as Bridgestone Firestone, MSN, Vanderbilt University, Meredith, and Google. His diverse work responsibilities across various business functions uniquely qualify him to lead the team that guides the design and evolution of SiteHawk products. And now I'll turn the presentation over to David.
Great, thanks, Ed. And thanks everybody for joining today. This session should be interesting for those of you who have yet to dip your toe into analytics for your organization, and for those who probably already have, as most businesses have already. And at the end of this presentation, I'm hoping that you'll walk away with a sense of being able to get your arms around the big questions that are related to analytics and what you're being asked by your organizations to accomplish. So let's first talk about data, because analytics is basically the understanding of data. I know that most every organization that I talk to in my line of business are collecting all kinds of data. In fact, they're collecting so much data that sometimes when I look at their data, there's so much I'm not sure what it's for. So today's session is really about starting with a plan around analytics so that you can get the most out of it, and so that you can grow as your needs and your commitment to getting more information from analytics grows as well. So let's talk about data. 90% of the world's data was actually created in the last 2 years. So if you think about that, since 2015, 90% of the data has been created, which is astounding. And every day we collect 2.5 quintillion bytes a day. Now, I would even struggle to find a way to explain that in gigs or exabytes or terabytes, but let me give you an example. That's 57.5 billion 32 gigabyte iPads. That's a lot of data, and that's every day. So does all that data matter? I think that that's really what we're going to talk about today, and I think that you'll find that what really matters is what you're trying to get to from the data. There are really 4 different things that you should think about related to data, and if you have a pencil or a pen, it would be great to write these 4 items down. Now, I'm borrowing this from Ralph Jacobson, who is a marketing manager at IBM for analytics surrounding retail. And these 4 items are volume, velocity, variety, and veracity. So before we jump straight into the presentation, these are the 4 things that you want to think about as well. And this is really why I bring the topic up of when data doesn't really matter. So volume is how much data are you really struggling with? Do you have? Velocity, how fast can you collect that data from the various systems that you may use? In the variety, what are the sources of your data? Is it structured? Is it unstructured? Does it line up with data that you're getting out of your other systems? And then veracity, this is really about the quality of the data, because today, 33% of business leaders don't actually trust the information that they are getting from analytics to make business decisions. So with that, let's jump right in. So why are analytics exciting? I think analytics are exciting because they've been around for a while. We may not have really realized how important they've become for us to be able to make great decisions and more educated decisions in our businesses. So for me, analytics are great because I can see how many emails I have. I can see what I've been doing and where I've been spending my money and my budget. So many different ways that analytics can get us down the road. Now, some of the basic analytics that we have, where here's how many emails you need to read today or go through, all the way to the ones that analytics that really help you make better decisions or give you recommendations for either a safer workplace or for changes that you might need to make if you're wanting to make a change inside your business. So let's talk about that. So today, I want to bring up two different real-world examples so that we can tie back to, well, what are these four different types of analytics and what do they mean? So if you're familiar with, you may be familiar with Mint. Mint is an application that came out probably in the last 10 years, and basically Mint monitors all of your financials and everything from your credit card account, when bills are due, your checking account, and it basically shows you where you've spent your money, and does an analysis in a beautiful dashboard of where you're spending your money, if you're about to hit your budget that you've set into the system, and it's a great window into seeing what you're doing with your budget every month. The other one I want to bring up here is Waze. So I don't know which map system you actually use, but I use Waze, and it's fantastic because it's providing real feedback and real data back to me when I'm going from point A to point B and reroutes me around issues. Now, both of these pieces of software actually are being driven by analytics. So let's jump in and talk about what kinds of analytics there are. So there are four basic types of analytics, and here you can see the analytics maturity model. Now, most of us use what are called descriptive analytics, and some of us use diagnostic analytics, and all the way up through prescriptive. But what are these things? Well, descriptive is what's happened, right? So how many checks did you write this month? How many emails did you get? Diagnostic tells you about why those things happened. So you have X amount of dollars in your bank account, and that's the what's happened, or the descriptive analytics. And then why it happened is because somebody wrote checks on your account and for those skiing lessons, right? Now, moving up the line to not only in value but in commitment here is the what may happen. Now, this is predictive analytics, and why this is so exciting and interesting is that predictive analytics can warn you if something bad is about to happen or could happen, and or show you how to trend the use of certain materials in your products so that you can have greener products or safer products. There's lots of different ways to use predictive analytics. And then the holy grail, of course, is prescriptive analytics. So how do we reduce risk and improve outcomes? So prescriptive is really about giving suggestions or recommendations based on all of the other information that you have so that you can actually make better decisions. So the reason that I show this maturity model, which I think is one of the easiest ways to explain analytics to the uninitiated, is that what happened is a fairly easy data to get to, right? How many materials do I have in my facility? How many different ingredients do I have? What's the volume of those materials? Those kinds of things are fairly easy to get to. Now, as you move up the scale to the right, what you're going to find is that now you have to bring in cross-functional kinds of information, different data sets, so that you can see a bigger and a broader picture. Now, what I see have seen in the market this year is that a lot of people are really talking about prescriptive analytics, but it's the holy grail. You know, it's I need the system to tell me what to do before something bad happens, or I need it to tell me what products I should substitute, or how I can actually consolidate purchases to improve my ROI. There's lots of different ways to use prescriptive analytics. However, it's not as easy to get to as some people have been talking about, and we'll get into that in a little bit. So again, most of us are probably using descriptive analytics. As well, we have a lot of people that are using diagnostic, but then as we get into the optimization, the predictive and the prescriptive, which are really important, especially in safety scenarios, those are not as much used. But what's really important here is that you have to start with a great base of descriptive analytics. So going back to our two examples here between Mint and Waze, Mint is really descriptive and diagnostic analytics. And how that works is that here is what has happened, how many checks you've written, what the interest is that you might have gotten on your savings account, the value of your home may have increased, and diagnostic at the same time. So here's why these things happened, right? So the value of your home increased because of X, Y, and Z, or there's more money in your account today because there was a deposit. So quickly, you can see that Mint is really an analytics platform that takes data and puts it into digestible chunks to describe and explain why things are happening in your financial life. So in a ways, is really predictive and prescriptive analytics. So when I put in my destination, I'm going from the office to my home, it's going to predict at what time I'm going to arrive. And what it's using is all kinds of data behind the scenes, right? How many people are on the road, how many other users are going in that same direction, what is the possible, the speed at which people are moving, and it's predicting what time I'm going to arrive. Now, how it is using prescriptive analytics is that it is also looking at other data like what are the other roads that might get Dave from point A to point B. So it predicts, it sees that there is an accident or a slowdown, and based on my requests can prescribe new directions around a problem spot or an area that has too much traffic. So these are really two good examples of not only descriptive and diagnostic analytics, so what happened and why did it happen, but also the predictive and prescriptive. Here's where when we think you're going to arrive, and here's how you could choose another road to get to your destination and avoid traffic. Now, as we are moving along, as Regina pointed out, if you have any questions, feel free to put those into the chat box on the bottom right-hand side, and we will get to as many of those as we can before the end of today's session. If we don't get to your questions, then if we run out of time today, we will certainly reach out directly to you to provide feedback. So what does analytics mean for someone involved in EH&S? Well, the challenge here is that there's a lot of information, whether it's regulatory, whether it's around materials or hazards, all the things that EH&S managers, as well as their companies, have to be concerned about. So analytics can help us in various ways, from how much do we have of a material because we have to report it for environmental, or there are two materials that are reactive to each other and in the same area, we should probably move those so that they are not in the same area, right? So there are lots of ways that analytics can be leveraged by an EH&S manager and companies around EH&S to not only provide better R&D, manage change, but also kind of predict and avoid the things that we don't want to have happen. So again, I want to give an example so that we can kind of springboard from an example that is a realistic and possible reality, and so that we can kind of understand in our own realm how analytics kind of relates to us. So I want you to imagine for a second an incident in the petrochemical industry. I'm not trying to pick on the petrochemical industry at all, but there are a lot of different moving parts, and I think it's something that we've either seen or heard about, so it's something that we can go on to quickly. So if there were an incident, let's say there was an explosion, what is the kind of information that we would need to either avoid the incident at all or lessen the impact of that? So this is where we're going to start talking about, really, does all the data matter? So in the process that I've used throughout my career building products is that we always start with the why. What are you trying to get to? What are you trying to solve? And for analytics, it's going to operate the same way. So the things that you should be thinking about are answering the questions that are the most important that you would need to be able to answer prior to an event, or let's say that you had to answer them after an event. So let's say that there was an incident at a plant and the CSB comes in. They're going to be asking questions during their investigation, right? They're going to ask questions about, they're going to look at all of your documentation. They're going to review all the information and statistics about your locations. They're actually going to go and look at all of your data. So if you look at any particular incident that's happened when the CSB comes in, they're looking at the broad scope of information. So how can we take that idea of what they're looking for to be able to get to either a timeline or reduce a risk or eliminate the possibility of a tragic incident? And let's start from there. So there are really 4 kinds of questions that we're going to talk about today. So there are the universal questions, questions that we all have to answer. There are industry-specific questions. There are business-specific, so whether you're in textiles or you're in petrochemical or food and beverage, there are business-specific questions that relate not only to you from the industry's perspective, but from the perspective of your business. Your business may have different rules that apply through the regulations. And then, of course, location-specific. So you may have 10 plants across the U.S., or you may have plants in the U.S. as well as Canada or abroad. Those questions are going to be very different. So as we're going through these questions, these 4 types, these are the kinds of questions that are the outline really for what you're going to determine is the information set or the data set for what you're going to use to build your analytics program. So let's talk about universal questions. Well, the first one we might say here in the U.S. is, am I compliant? Am I GHS compliant for HAZCOM? Have I provided all the reporting that I need to? Pretty straightforward. Also, what kind of hazards do I have? What are the materials I have on site? What are the hazards that are indicative for each of those? Do I have visibility to that, since I have to train all of my employees on new products that are coming on site as well as their hazards? From a safety perspective, how many incidents or near misses have I had that have been, at this particular facility in the last 30 days or over another span of time? So these are the kinds of questions that are universal basically to all of us, right? So let's talk about some industry-specific questions. Now, do your materials that are on site, is there a specific industry regulation that you have to be attentive to because you're subject to that because of the vertical that you're in? Also, you may have industry-specific lists. For instance, if you are in the textiles industry, you may have a list that is covered like the AAFA list, which requires, provides a list of all the materials that you should not be having in your sites or using in your processes, right? Also, what is the output to air, water, waste from your processes? So these again are can be industry specific. Now, from a business standpoint, you want to be thinking about what materials are on site and that are subject to business specific lists. Now, when I say this, I want to be clear about this. So if you are a processor and you are manufacturing something for a downstream client and the supply chain, then you may have a contractual requirement that says, hey, we do not want these things used in the process or even at your plant. So for your business, beyond regulations, beyond the universal questions that we have to answer, you need to make sure that you understand what are the contractual requirements and obligations that you have to make sure that materials are not on site. The other thing that I think is very important is, of course, chemicals approval. So in product development, how are these incoming materials, how are they being approved? What kind of information do you know about them? If you're trying to alter your product development cycle so that and the materials you use to be greener or safer, then how are you collecting that information? And then, of course, what internal or corporate safety protocols are actually being implemented in your organization. So have people been trained in this area? Have all people been trained? What training have they done? Now, location-specific questions, I think, are always interesting to me because geography is and industry, as well as everything else that goes on in a specific location, can really alter the kinds of data that you need to make sure that you're collecting and so that you can analyze it. So, for instance, the regulations that you have in Canada may be different than you have in the U.S. In fact, we know they are. They may be different from state to state. So Kentucky to California, your thresholds for certain reporting are certainly going to be different, and you want to be able to understand what agencies that you need to be able to report to and have to report to for a specific location. Also, what are the environmental conditions? So does the altitude or the temperature actually for that location, if it's not controlled, then what things do you need to know about that facility so that you can make sure that the analytics is pulling back information around materials that can't be stored in certain temperatures or may act differently in at certain altitudes. And then, of course, around the hazard communication standard, what kind of documents do I need to have? Do I need to be concerned about what languages that these documents are in? And questions about the workforce itself, everything from training to education, right? So I'm going to stop here for a second, and because I want to pose a question that is, I think is important, is that if, are you asking yourselves the questions that you need to get answers to? And this is really the first step of building your analytics program. So starting there and is basically the best place to start. And not all of the information is going to be absolutely necessary at first, but I think that getting the questions right or the best that you can at the beginning is going to set you off on a perfect road to getting actually the best analytics program set up that you can. So more data is not better. It's just not. I think the right data is better, but more data is not necessarily better. And here's why I say that, is that collecting all the information, which is kind of a standard protocol for most companies these days, as we talked about at the top of this presentation, it is certainly a critical and important need that most organizations feel. But when you're looking at your EH&S analytics program, you want to be very targeted and you want to be very precise. And you can get that way by starting out slowly and starting out by looking at what is the right data. So you could be pulling that information from various sources, whether it's documentation that you get from importers and manufacturers like SDS information or technical data sheets, full formula data sheets. There's many, many different ways to collect this information. But starting with the questions that you want to answer is the best way to understand what is the data set that you really need. So in preparing for this presentation today, I wanted to ask myself, write a list of questions that I might have around a particular facility. So when I started writing questions, of course, this is not all the questions that I could possibly ask or want information on, but this was a start to understand that this data is really broad, and this data is the volume of questions that you want to answer and be able to answer sometimes will outstrip where you're able to get this information. But this is a short set. So everything from what chemicals are restricted from the facility, and that could be a business-specific question. It could be a regulatory reason that the materials or chemicals are restricted from your facility or from your area, all the way to what needs to be done in case of an accidental release. So as you can see, there are many, many questions. And you may have gone through this process, but if not, there is certainly, this is a starter list of questions to start asking so that you can start pulling your information together. I think the key thing to also think about here are what are the relevant questions, right? And as you start writing out the questions, as I did in that sheet, then there is a point at which you will look at the questions and you will start sorting out and editing the ones that are really, they really don't apply to the function that you're trying to use that information for. So without asking the right questions, of course, the data can be overwhelming and frankly, could be useless. So how you're going to use those analytics to sift through the data to discover the data you need really starts with asking the right questions. So I'll give you some examples. Some standard things that you may want in EH&S are, how many products do I have? How many, what's the volume of those materials? Where are they actually located? What are their hazards? When were they active on site and inactive? How long have we archived that material? We've not had it on site, right? If you're wanting to follow the 30-year rule. What's the PPE that's recommended? What are the disposal requirements for any of these materials? So this information can be gotten to quickly via analytics, so dashboards and widgets that are specific to a specific area of your business. It may be around logins for people using the systems that you use to manage your safety data sheets or your chemical data, so that you can see not only adoption but also engagement with employees. So let's look at a real example here. So what happened, right, which is our descriptive analytics. So in this example, you may be concerned about how many of your safety data sheets are actually GHS compliant. It's a pretty big deal. Don't want to get a fine, and also want to make sure that the information is correct and standardized so that your employees understand each of the materials they're working with. So in a general example, this may be your GHS compliance tracker for your safety data sheets. So what this is telling you is that, hey, 76% of my documents are actually GHS compliant documents, 24% are not. So that number may seem high to you, but there's actually lots of reasons why that number could be true. We're going to talk about that now when we look over here at the diagnostic analytics. So remember, what happened and now why did it happen? So the reason we're using this example is because we can follow all the way through to see the difference between not only descriptive but diagnostic. So in a regular set of safety data sheets, you're going to find that around 76% are GHS compliant, whereas up to 24% are probably not. And there are lots of reasons. The product could be outdated. So the product's been no longer manufactured after, so they stopped manufacturing the product before the deadline for GHS. So the SDS you have is actually the only SDS. It's just not GHS compliant. Other reasons why you may not have a compliant document is because the business is actually no longer in business. So they went out of business before the GHS deadline. Therefore, the document you have is the only document that you're going to get for that particular product. So again, first one that we looked at, just in general, is the what happened or what do we have, and then diagnostic is, well, why is that? So in this example, you could click on, you may, depending on your system, click on the 24% here, the blue pie, and go into seeing all the reasons why some of your documents are not compliant. So So let's move on to predictive analytics. So this is what will happen. So I think the easiest way to think about this is thinking about a trend. And the easiest way to put that into perspective, I think, for the EH&S community is to look at regulatory thresholds. So in your state, you may have a regulatory threshold of 10,000 pounds for a particular material. And what predictive analytics can do is it looks at various types of data to pull up a trend, and this is where you may reach your threshold. So for example, in January, you receive 2 units of material X. In February, you have 4. In March, you have 5. What the system is doing is looking at what is the name of the material, what's the regulatory information around that particular material. So here we have not only material and ingredient information, including percentages, right? We also should be looking at how much of that material is actually on site. So inventory information, using regulatory information with thresholds so that we understand, hey, when it reaches this threshold, we'll have to report, right? So what predictive analytics will do is show you that you're at your current rate of consumption or use or storage when you are probably going to reach the threshold to report. So predictive analytics takes information from various places in your business to basically come up with the trend and the possible, basically the flag in the sand of where you're going to have to report. So prescriptive analytics. So this is really my favorite thing to talk about right now, because what you're going to hear, and if you've attended any industry events this year, you will have heard this. I've heard it. I also believe in it, and I subscribe to it, is that, we want to get to prescriptive analytics. Everyone does. Here's a little bit of the challenge. So remember, the prescriptive analytics is basically using all the data from all of your sources and the right data to determine and to give recommendations on either substitutions for products or how to avoid an incident, basically giving you a guidebook, a data coach that helps you understand not only what's going on in your business or in a facility, but also how to improve your ROI, reduce risks, and basically, be a more successful organization. Here's the challenge, is that this is, and I'm going to jump back to our graph here for a second and show you that although that it is the Holy Grail, as not the movie, but the Holy Grail, is that prescriptive analytics really requires the most commitment out of your organization. So support for that has to come from the very top, and every business's appetite is going to be different for that, of course. However, the further you go through the maturity model for analytics, the value increases exponentially. So from basically having to use a lot of humans to make a lot of decisions and review a lot of information, you're letting the system actually support you in making the presenting options and getting you to a decision faster. So again, in predictive analytics, this is what we think is going to happen. Prescriptive is what you should do or recommendations to change either for more success or lower risk, right? So you can see here in this example, if you want to avoid the threshold, you may want to substitute product B because it doesn't have the ingredient that must be reported. Again, at this time, I'm going to remind everybody that we are going to have a Q&A session here in a few minutes. And if you have any questions, that using the chat box to the bottom right-hand side of your screen is the best way to get us questions. So let's look at the insight around analytics for 2018. So this information is from Gartner, which is an industry analyst organization, global organization. And I think that what's interesting about this is that we're probably all using analytics at some level. Now, you may be using that in a spreadsheet today. And you know what? That's okay. Because of most of the organizations that I work with, every organization uses spreadsheets quite a lot. They depend on them a lot because it's something that's easy for most folks to be able to use and get around to each other. However, all of us are using analytics. So today, and in 2018, we're looking that most business users are going to have access to self-service tools to prepare data for analysis. Now, I'm not going to pitch one particular tool over another, but if you use Microsoft applications and you have Windows machines, Power BI was released earlier in the year by IBM and by Windows and Microsoft, and this is actually a very powerful tool for you to even import your spreadsheets or actually take information from other systems to be able to look at it and analyze. So what we're looking at in 2018 also is that most standalone self-service data preparation offerings are going to be expanded into other generations. And analytic platforms have been integrated as features into existing analytics platforms. So what you're going to see is that in basically every piece of software that you're using, there will be an analytics or a dashboard functionality. The other thing that's going to be important about the analytics that you're going to see is that there will be some very easy ways to search across this information, put typically cross-functional data together in new ways to provide new insights that you may not have had up to this point. What's great about that is that some of the information that other departments in your organization are collecting really can help you drive a lot of really interesting things inside your business. So I wanted to show you really how many businesses are using different types of analytics. So remember how we talked about descriptive, which is the what happened. It's the easiest to get into, doesn't require a lot of commitment, and although it's important, the value is not as strong as you move down the right in the maturity model. You'll see here that 78% of businesses right now are actually using descriptive analytics. I'm sure that you're using them in your businesses right now, whether you're aware of it or not. Another 9% on top of that are also using diagnostic analytics. Again, this is a little bit harder to get into because we've moved from the, well, what happened to, well, why did that happen, right? So the why is a pretty big deal. Then predictive analytics, so what do we think might happen, is actually larger than the diagnostic. And what I would say about this is that I think that oftentimes descriptive analytics and diagnostic analytics, so what happened and why did it happen, are sometimes confused. And so I believe that this is actually, that diagnostic is probably a little bit bigger than predictive because predictive is just harder to do. And then prescriptive, of course, this is the, as we said, the top 2%. So when we talk about why it is the top of the heap, is that a lot goes into this prescriptive. So the thing that I would caution everyone to do is that when you're thinking about or someone's trying to talk to you about prescriptive analytics, you have to know what your questions are first, right? What is it that you're trying to accomplish? What are the answers that you need to get to? Because prescriptive analytics, there is not an out-of-the-box solution today that works for every single facility or even every facility inside a business because the conditions are different, right? Do you have an active vent? Do you have, what's the average temperature? What kind of materials do you have? So prescriptive analytics becomes a little bit harder simply because every single facility that you want prescriptive analytics for is really custom work. Now, I don't say that to say don't do that. I think that prescriptive analytics is amazing and that we should all be trying to reach to that. However, I also want to be quite plain about the fact that it does require some commitment. And if you're a larger business that has multiple facilities, you have a large footprint, then this is not a trivial exercise. So as we said, we were going to get to the checklist for the EH&S professional for what you're going to need to start putting your analytics program together, or to reevaluate the analytics program that you already have. So the first thing I would say is that make sure that you look at the outline that's in this particular presentation when it's provided, and use the idea that there are the 4 main types of questions that you want to be asking, and start with your list. What answers do you need to know? I would say start small and start slow. I've spent a lot of time on this in the last couple of years, and the questions can get out of hand quickly, all the questions that you might want to answer. Start slow and get the things right that you want to get right, so that further down the line, as you're maturing your analytics program, that information is solid. So remember, the veracity of the data is critical. Is this data correct? Is it verifiable? Is it high quality? And starting small and starting slow is really the best way to get there. So I think the first questions that you start having to do is evaluating the business needs that you have, so that you can make sure that you can answer those questions. And this is not something that you can do in a silo. If you do it in a silo, what you'll find out is that you'll have to go back and you'll have to do some reworking, right? Because sometimes other departments are trying to get the same information that you are, the same answers that you are. So it's important to really make sure that this is a cross-functional effort. The other thing to explore, and this always brings a smile to my face, is that explore data sources and the methods of integration. So there are sets of data that even here at SiteHawk that I was not aware of. And when I started going down the path myself of, hey, I'd like to put together some information around this particular question that I'm trying to answer, I found out that there are some amazing data sources that people are managing and that they are creating even in this business. So it's going to work the same way in your organization. So making sure that that you've gotten a cross-functional team together to a working team that will be able to say, hey, here's the data that we have, here are the questions that we're trying to answer. Exploring what those data sources are and the ways that you can integrate that information is really, it's a critical building block for getting your analytics program off the ground. So at the end of the day, I think that we're all looking at analytics as we want transparency in being able to see what's happening in our business, what's happening around the products that we use or that we create, and to make sure that we can see the business from end to end. So it's important also at the time that you're looking at data sources, you're working with your cross-functional team, is to also examine what your processes are. And some of those processes may not actually have a data output, which can really leave a gap in the information that you're trying to get to. Phasing adjustments, I think, is really important. So a lot of this can be huge chunks to bite off and to try to get through. The challenge is that you should do is, as I said at the beginning of this, is you need to start small and start slow. See how it works, see if you're getting the right information, if it's the results that you're looking for. If not, you can make small adjustments, right? It's kind of the same way that most modern companies develop their software, is through an agile process. So it's the same kind of thing where you make small adjustments, incremental adjustments to get to the prime data that you're looking for. And lastly, and most importantly, is that you have to take action. So, you know, we've all heard analysis paralysis. So you plan, but you know, for us to get these projects through, you have to really advocate for them, and you have to take action. And sometimes that may mean that you get to learn a new skill about analytics, whether it's descriptive or diagnostic, or you're doing all the way up to predictive and prescriptive. It is important to take action. I say that just because oftentimes we get into the excitement of what we could do, but then we never pull the trigger. It also goes back to start slowly. If you're wanting just to measure one thing, measure that one thing and do it well. And that will give you the runway to start measuring and getting information out of your organization to help you do your jobs. So at this time, we are going to move to Q&A.
Okay, thanks, David. That's a great presentation. We have a handful of questions already. Just to remind our audience, if you'd like to ask a question, please type it into the chat window on the right side of your screen and send to all panelists. The first question is from Greg, and he asks, please refresh me on the 30-year rule that you mentioned earlier.
Oh, sure, great. So in the HAZCOM standard, so OSHA 2012, there's a 30-year rule that requires that you have the name, the manufacturer, the end-use dates for every material for the past 30 years. Now, I will say that the law actually only requires, and you should certainly look this up and also talk with your legal department, but the law only requires that you have a list. What we try to recommend is that if you have the SDSs, that you actually have more information. And typically this is, in my understanding is used, this information is used for typically risk management scenarios. So someone comes back and says, hey, I have this condition. I believe that I was exposed to something while I was at work. And basically these records are kept specifically for those kinds of situations. So again, if you look at the, and you can just, it's easy to Google it, but the 30-year rule is name of the material, manufacturer name, and location it was used, and active dates.
Okay. Ryan has a question. He asks, what suggestions do you have for a young professional looking to get into the EHS analytics field? What professional development do you suggest?
Ooh, well, that's broad, but there are a lot of really great classes that you can take, as well as, depending on if this is something that you're wanting to make a career, there are actually degrees out there for an information technology that is that are specific to analytics. There are a couple of systems that we use internally for training, but I would say that if you're familiar with how spreadsheets work, that looking for a training program on a piece of software like Power BI from Microsoft will give you a good start on understanding how to structure the data so that you can get out the results that you want. So, today's presentation is really about trying to eat the entire pie by yourself is close to impossible. And my recommendation today is, start with the slices that you can get to, and then you can get around to that whole pie. And I would say the same thing about data structure. So we've talked today about how to, we know that not all the data is necessarily important, the right data is, but what I'm saying for you and my advice would be is that start with understanding how those applications work, and that will give you a leg up, because oftentimes you can get into an application and we just assume that we're going to drop in a spreadsheet or provide a data source, and then what happens is that it doesn't give you the results you were looking for, and that's all based on the data structure. So, finding a commercially available piece of software that's specific for analytics is a great way to get some basic training. And then, like I said, there are programs all the way up through university level degrees in data analytics.
Okay. There's a question from Rustin. He writes, I am a professor for graduate safety science students. To best prepare them for their future responsibilities, what aspects of data analytics should I focus on? A list of 3 to 5 items would be awesome, he says.
So here's what I would say. If you look at like in our business, we started with the whole idea of, there are regulations that every business needs to be compliant for. So I would say that from an analytics standpoint, being able to know where and how to find the data for compliance, whether it's hazard communication, whether it's reporting, it's important to know where to go and get those sources. So the sources of the data it's critical. Now, every business is ever so slightly different, but I would say from an analytics standpoint, the understanding descriptive and diagnostic analytics are going to be the most important. And if you have a student that is working in the environmental side, their information is going to be different than if somebody's working on the safety side and their data source is SDS data, for instance. So I think it's going to be different for each one, but you're welcome to reach out to me and we can chat about the some things that we see that if you like. So I would say that knowing where the data is, knowing how you are going to get it, and then sticking with, like I've said here, is that starting with the descriptive and the diagnostic is going to basically cover most of your students' needs from a tactical or operational, here's what I have to do on a day-to-day basis.
Okay. Julie asks, in your experience, how do you qualify the quality of the data in your analytics output? For example, in dealing with thousands of incident records, your output is only as reliable as the quality of the input of the data.
And what's her name again? Sorry.
Her name is Julie.
Julie. Well, Julie, you have hit on the this is the nugget right here. So, of course, if the data in is CRUD, the data out is CRUD. And that's why 33% of business leaders don't trust the actual information that they're getting. So this is where, we have to wear several different hats, right? One is that you got to be aware of what you're getting informationally from, whether it's manufacturers, your vendors, whoever you're getting information from. You have to kind of wear different hats. So, for instance, let me give you some examples. So, if I looked at SDS, I could tell you that, hey, this CAS number, for instance, doesn't go with this name of this ingredient, right? So you have to check, and then you have to be tenacious and work with your vendors to be like, hey, this isn't right. And now sometimes you can catch stuff like the name, the CAS number, they're not matching up, right? So you can use technology and leverage technology to save you in some of those areas, but the tools are not going to necessarily relieve us from having to check the data. So, I think that you have to find the best source that you can, and then you're going to have to actively manage it. So, the software that you're using may be helping you manage SDSs, or it may be helping you manage chemicals approval. It might help you manage something else, but the key thing here is that if you want great results out of that data, that you're going to have to dig in and and create processes and kind of safeguards to protect yourself. Otherwise, this thing becomes a monster that it's hard to reel in. So, so data quality is the trick here, right? Because there's enough of it out there, but that's why, this is the whole basis of the supposition of, you don't need all the data. You've got to have the right data, and it's got to be good data. So, Julie, I think that you've struck it on the head, is that, making sure that the source is the sovereign source for that information is great. I'll give you some examples. So probably all of us on the phone have gone out and used an application from National Institutes of Health, PubChem. So if you go out there, look up ethylbenzene, and then go down to the synonyms section. So if you go down to the synonyms section, then what you're going to find is you start reading through those synonyms, you're going to realize that some of those synonyms have nothing to do with ethylbenzene. So I think that you have to be picky and choosy about where you're going to get your data, and that's why working with an internal group of people who are in different departments, one department might have a really great set of data that actually is cleaner than the data that you have. So, and I will tell you, data, like, the reason I bring up PubChem is that, this is a group sourced, a crowdsourced data collection. Sometimes that data is not right, or it's strange why you might find, carbon monoxide as a synonym for ethylbenzene, So, yeah, I think that once you get your data straight, you're going to have to find the best sources, but be diligent about that. It'll make you happier in the long run.
Good. Another question. What internal teams should I involve in the implementation of analytics? Well,
so we actually use, I will say in my experience, I've talked to people from every department. And the reason I do that is that the finance department has a set of information that I can use for part of what I'm trying to pull out. The data group, they understand the data better than I'm going to. So they can, they can guide me in a certain direction. So I think that the first thing to do is actually talk to each of these groups now sales, in your case, in the cases of the folks on the line today may not be an important department, but you should talk to each department and then determine which group, what that group is going to be. So, again, we find, we uncover data sources that are being managed and are really high quality internally that we just didn't know about because we hadn't asked.
Okay, Catherine asks, can you manage equipment or other compliance monitoring data the same way you showed as chemicals?
Absolutely. In fact, the one slide that has all of the questions about the chemicals, I basically took that example of what if there were an explosion at a refinery, and I started writing all the questions for what I might, what I would need answers for, or what the CSB might, be trying to uncover. So absolutely, and you can do that through in a couple of different ways, right? Some of these systems actually have automatic feedbacks, so that you get data fed back into the system. That may be more manual, where you're using a mobile device and you're auditing and you're inspecting some equipment. When was it last inspected? What was the recommendation for the inspection? Was the recommendation handled? All those kinds of things. So I look at this as, when I talk about just in my day-to-day life here, chemical data intelligence or chemical data IQ, it's really about anything that chemical touches, right? And that includes equipment. So absolutely, you can use analytics to drive when do I need to inspect this machinery? When do we need to change out filters? There's so many different ways to use that data. And although today I specifically was talking about chemicals, I think that absolutely you should be using it across the business.
Okay, and I think we have just time for one more question. Robert asks, can you use predictive analytics to anticipate departments or people who will be involved or cause accidents?
Yes. So a lot of the research that that has come out in the last year has really pointed to the stronger your EH&S program is, the actually is an indicator for what your operational excellence is going to be. So in the same way, you can look at how many people are actually logging into systems. How many people are they searching for information? Are they submitting new products for approval, there's absolutely a way to score and to use analytics as an indicator of where there are problems. Now, some of the most interesting things that I think that are being talked about right now is the, analysis across your own organization from different departments. Or let's say you have 2 plants and each plant has a paint shop. Being able to score against peers, right, and see what is this facility or this chemical area doing that's different from this one. So yeah, predictive analytics can show you trends and give you, an indicator of what you're going to see. I mean, we've already seen it. We see it already. I think you have to be able to ask yourselves the right questions. So to give you an example, we actually came up with an algorithm to determine engagement in EH&S systems. So what is, is this company or is this facility actually engaged in the EH&S process, right? Whether that's, they're looking for safety data sheets or they're reporting incidents, whatever those things may be, and we came up with an algorithm. And the same thing is can be used for indicating, hey, these folks probably need some more training, or they're not really adding anything to the system, and we know that there are new products being ordered all the time. It's another, indicator of here's a risk, whether it's for audit or for an incident.
Okay, thanks, David. Unfortunately, we're out of time. My apologies if I wasn't able to get to a question that anyone has asked. Someone from David or David's team will be happy to follow up with you later after the presentation. David, thank you for your presentation. Thanks to SiteHawk for sponsoring today's webinar, and to all of our listeners, please be on the lookout for announcements of future Synergist webinars.